We are live. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
I'm so great. Happy Wednesday.
Yes, the smoke-filled Wednesday here.
Seriously, it feels like it's so white that we should be getting snow, but not the case. Anyway, it's so good to see you. I'm excited for our second conversation in our three-part series that we're doing just this week, where we're talking specifically about educator burnout and some of the things that we've learned along the way. Thank you all for being here. We have a few folks with us already, so thank you for being here. Again, this is our second of our three-part conversation that we're having just this week. A candid conversation about educator burnout. The first session we had on Monday, and then the last session we'll have will be on Friday. So, Patrick, refresh our memory. What did we cover on Monday? What did we cover on Monday? Oh yeah.
Yeah, so we covered a bunch of things actually. Most importantly, is we kind of looked at the indicators that we are seeing that tells us that this is a big problem. What are the factors, and what are the ways we know that burnout in education is a big issue? We also then kind of looked at within that sphere, within that burnout, and within the educational sector specifically, we started thinking about how do we teach our teachers to stay empowered in situations, environments that may lack respect, autonomy, support, and purpose. Like, how do you keep showing up in situations that may not support the type of work you need to do? How do you start with yourself and move forward there? We also then talked about what we're seeing in terms of teachers we've worked with who've had success in the face of all of this, how they overcome their stress, how they have intentional practices that ensure their success going forward. And then we also talked about the method that you use, Michelle, when you work with teachers. What are the advantages of an approach like this that focuses on resilience and focuses on self, and maybe eliminates some of the stigmas around people seeking to get mental health insight. And then we kind of talked about what that means going forward for teachers, and how we might look at some of the larger issues that are plaguing teachers right now, some of the things that you might want to talk about from the June Trends report. And we kind of wanted to use that as a springboard for today.
Awesome. Yeah, we did. We set the tone, and for those of you who are not educators, Patrick set the tone really nice. So you want to go back and catch the first episode that we did on Monday, just to kind of get the whole flavor of it. So we were going to dive right in. I wanted to share with you, recently we released our June Trends report, which is a compilation of all of the data that we've been collecting. And when I say collecting, I basically went back to all the files of all the teachers I've coached over the past 20 months. It would be 2 school years, basically. Went back and looked at all the data, and the current data too that we recently had in a couple of pilots that we ran, and pulled that together and released what I was seeing were the most common reasons why educators were feeling like they were headed toward burnout or had reached burnout. So just want to highlight those 4. There were 4 key areas that showed up in that trends report consistently. The first one was the workload, the heavy workload. Like, in a post-pandemic world, things are different now. So a lot of teachers were feeling like they had unrealistic workload that were extending beyond the classroom, compromising their personal time and all that stuff, right? They weren't having the ability to get their arms around their work, which was really frustrating for them. The second piece was around challenging student behavior. So we all know kids have been affected deeply by the pandemic, and so it's showing up, right? And so teachers were explaining the issue of the chronic student behavior, the discipline issues that they're having, continuously trying to manage that and be effective. And then the third one was work-life imbalance. Ties in with workload, right? People were feeling extremely challenged, juggling classroom responsibilities, lesson planning, professional development, all of that. And then trying to make the time for self-care, relaxation, maintaining a good balance. many teachers were confessing that they're compromising their sleep just to try to, get the papers graded at night or do whatever, and foregoing family time. So those were some, a very important piece of the four. And then finally, the fourth one that kept showing up over and over was a unhealthy school culture. So where they feel like their culture in their school, the dynamics amongst themselves, was compromising in terms of how they're feeling every day, who they're interacting with, how they're left at the end of the day, right? So they're getting it in the classroom, and then they're not even feeling a sense of connection and community and rallying support for one another. So that was the fourth one. Does this resonate, Patrick? Have you heard this too?
Yeah, oh, yes. So I have various groups of teachers that I meet with at different levels. I meet with individual teachers in classrooms and things like that. But I also have larger groups where I've kind of assembled them to get an insight into what's going on, not only academically, but also with issues like this. And the workload piece has really come up quite a bit since we've returned from the pandemic. One of the aspects that occurred during the pandemic was everything became free, meaning all of these crazy digital tools that we used to have to pay for out of the goodness of their heart and probably some extremely talented marketing folks, they made these things free. And then when it all ended, the subscriptions then started. But also too, we got teachers that were used to using tools like this and used to being go forever. When we came back into the classroom, the kids arrived, and that pace didn't slow down, and the workload didn't stop either. You had all these tools that they were using. We had all this data that we were collecting. And what happens is teachers then begin to triage, these new initiatives or these new things that they're asked to do in their normal workload. There's only a finite, space for them to do these things. So workload became a very big issue. We also, in many places, you have expanding populations, or you have students moving from other countries that are coming here with limited English proficiency. So all of those things now topple, like they pile on top of teachers' responsibilities. Couple that with the challenging behaviors, you now have more responsibilities and more difficult students and things like that. The motivation one you mentioned is a really big one as well. Mm-hmm. And we talk about that all the time with teachers and students. How do you motivate a child, and how do you engage a child in a classroom? It's, it sounds simple. It sounds, hey, you give them work and they do it. It's not really how it functions. You have to find a way to build a relationship with the child and then get that child to want to do the work that sometimes will be fun and sometimes will not be fun. And that's a really hard thing to do. And especially now, if you have students that are showing behaviors due to, increased screen time, lack of sociability, parents that are dealing with mental health issues that affect them, all of these things become factors for our teachers.
Yeah, I think that the student behavior one, I feel like, has come up over and over again on calls where they're just like, we have really challenging students that need our attention, that need more attention, that we don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the resources. So I keep hearing that. And I also hear the good-hearted nature of them, that they just want to do more, but they're like limited, And so I can imagine that is impacting them on an emotional level as well. So, yeah. So Patrick, go ahead.
I was going to say the last one too, the school culture unhealthy. So all of these factors, they contribute to a larger whole. Like, you work with individuals quite a bit, and individuals collectively make an entire culture within a building or within a district. And it really becomes a product of what everyone is individually dealing with, that school culture. And it takes very dedicated and very purposeful work on behalf of school leaders and district leaders to change school cultures. And if that's not occurring, or if those people themselves are overwhelmed with the amount of the workload that they have and the challenging employee behaviors, let's say, it becomes really difficult for an entire school culture to change. And that kind of feeds into itself. So what I propose, and the work we've done together, we've worked on the individual, and now it's time to continue to move forward and maybe work on the collective as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that one by one, I've always said this, like one by one, it's sort of been pretty cool to witness getting to coach a large group of people from one school and hear the impact that that has on the culture. Sometimes it's the individual one-on-one empowerment conversation that can lend itself to collectively shifting culture, which is really cool. And
Yeah.
and it also is a lot of work, a lot of legwork to do it that way. But honestly, if you have one individual empowered and feeling good, it's only going to positively affect people.
And I can say this too, from that perspective, knowing people that have worked with you, individual teachers that have worked with you, what happens is the success from those interactions and those sessions then travels by word of mouth. And then there's a collective bond between those two people. Then there's three people, four people, five people. And that's kind of how I've seen it play out. When positive work is being done and it's shared, that collective grows and you have a bigger chance at making a bigger, a larger impact for a staff or for a culture and a community. So yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
kind of what we're seeing.
One of the things that comes up so often in the coaching calls that I have is this relationship to time, and I've even had teachers go and email me and go, I just don't have time to meet with you. And I'm like, but I don't need a lot of your time. How about just a little bit of time? But their whole relationship to time is that it's a scarcity perspective. There is not enough of it, and they are constantly struggling with it. So let's talk about this idea of gaining time.
Yeah, and so I look at this often, and I can tell you that on my best days, I'm really good at this. On days like today, I can be honest, I'm not very good at this. So there were whole chunks of time in my day that I lost for various reasons. Some of it's internal, some of it's external,
Yeah.
and I think that's a struggle that everybody has. But working with you over the last few months and working with individuals and reading things, one of the areas that we can help teachers with is look at time in three ways. What can you eliminate from your day that is taking time away from you? What can you automate, meaning what can you put like outside of your mind that happens automatically that you don't have to think about?
Mhm.
And what can you delegate? In the case of an educational leader or a principal or something like that, you have an admin assistant or you have people that work alongside of you that maybe you can delegate tasks to them that you normally would do yourself. Not because they're beneath you or that they're not tasks that are fit for your position, so to speak, but just because everyone has a limited bandwidth and a limited capacity. Or as teachers like to say, like, my plate is full, I can't fit anything else on it. So take something off your plate and work with somebody else to provide opportunity to do that work. And then for teachers, that could be, what can you offload to your students? There was a great book a few years ago. I forget the name of the person that wrote it, but it was Never Work Harder Than Your Students. And essentially it was, if you look at the balance of activity in a classroom, it should always lean heavily towards the kids are a lot more active than the teacher. And we know that's the way that looks isn't always the case. Teachers do a lot of work on the back end.
Yeah.
But those three things, like figuring out how to automate, how to eliminate, and how to delegate, are great ways to look at time. I also tend to look, in some of the conversations that you and I have been having off live stream about various people that look at the processes that we have in our life and these automatic behaviors that we have that I think in a lot of ways take up and waste a lot of our time.
Mhm.
Things like, we've talked in the last session about teachers always in that panic mode or in that fight or flight mode, that stress mode, where our old brain tends to go into that gear where it says, okay, we have to protect you, we have to survive this, when it's not a life or death situation, but the stress is perceived that way. And I
Mhm.
think there are ways, if we're conscious about that, if we think about what those things are and those automatic triggers we have, we can gain back time by just realizing, okay, I don't have to behave that way. I can change that behavior. I can change my processes. Like, for example, this morning was one of those days I did not get out of bed when my alarm went off. I just rolled there. That's a practiced behavior, like I've done that for years. On my best days, I don't do that. I pop up, I get, and I have, I set aside time that I've now made, those 15 minutes of snooze, I can take advantage of and do something with. But that's a conscious decision I have to make. My
Yeah.
brain doesn't want to do that. It wants to kind of just stay
Yeah.
in bed.
Jill,
But
yeah.
but those are the things I think if we look at that and we look at how we can gain time, those small little tricks work. And over time, that accumulates and you now have more and more time back in your day.
It's so true. I mean, it's so true. I think that I say that every day we're either filling our emotional well-being bucket or pulling away from it, and whether or not we know what we're doing, one of those two things are happening with the practices that we do. And sometimes it's just a matter of getting present to that and saying, what's a better, more efficient way of using my time. Um, and waiting for circumstances outside of us to change in order to is another challenge that I see all the time. Like, well, when this actually happens and when that actually is implemented and maybe next year when this happens, then I will. And I'm like, oh man, but like you give all your power away to that anticipated thing that will ultimately, be the answer to everything. And that's always a challenge to get people to realize, like, you're in the cockpit, you choose.
Yeah. And it's all about too. One of the things I like when you say is stress happens. It happens every single day.
Every day.
You're going to be confronted with difficult people, difficult situations. And how you deal with that is a conscious choice. It may not feel like it. Like
Right.
your body may just automatically respond to it and you start sweating or like you get a hit, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or, you start doing the dishes. Some people have strange reactions to stress. But it's a conscious choice on how we deal with it. And that takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of practice.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we can help educators, anybody, not just educators, anybody
Yeah.
in any walk of life, recognize and take advantage of. It's not rocket science to think about your actions and how you're going to respond and practice that, in a very concise way.
I just want to emphasize what you just said because it's really important. I say this to my clients all the time, and I ask them every single time I get on a call with them, what's your stress level, 1 to 5? 5 being I'm so stressed out, 1 being I'm cool, I feel great. And the one thing I say to them is guarantee every day you are going to come to life and there will be life stress, family stress, work stress. The only thing you have only 100% control over is how you show up to deal with that stress. So, what are you doing to fill your bucket so that you're able to respond and not react? Like, how are you feeling when you're confronted with those cases? So, one of the things I really, I want people to really get here is that it's all in how we choose to prepare to deal with the stress. The stress is never going to go away. And to think the stress is going to go away is ludicrous, right? So the only thing we have power over is how prepared we are to deal with that stress.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the metaphor too, like, or I don't know if it's a metaphor, whatever it is, but that sounds on the surface, that sounds really simple to do, right? That sounds like, oh, I'll do that today,
Yeah.
and it's like when you read an article in, Men's Health or Women's Health, whatever it is, and it's about, the best arm workouts for the gym. And you're like, oh, that's great. I'll do that today. Do you actually? No, you don't. Like, but you read the article and you feel like I
Good
could if I
idea.
wanted to. So this is about practice.
Yeah.
This is about finding time to to understand what needs to be done and then making the time, creating the time and doing it. And that's a really big leap for a lot of people. I know it was a big leap for me
Mhm.
in this type of work. And again, I said, it's on my best days, I do this work. And on days like today, it just, it just doesn't happen. And I lose large chunks of time to absolutely nothing.
But you raise a really good point about, like, I have said this from day one that, like, the average person is falling into their day. Like, they legit are
Yes.
snooze, hit the alarm, catapult out of bed, high levels of cortisol, rush into the day, get behind the wheel, hit behind traffic. Before you know it, they're at the effects of their day. And when I say stop falling into your day, what I'm saying is be intentional instead of, like you said, instead of hitting snooze for 15 minutes, like get up and do something for you so that
Mhm.
you're actually feeling like I just filled my cup a little bit before I come at the day and all this stuff is going to be there no matter what. So
Yeah, and I think part of that too, and I'm thinking about this as, how I've approached it in the past is I have to-do lists. Like that's part of it, sure. Like creating a list that, I'll put things in my calendar that aren't real events, but they're things I know I need to do. But that's not it. Like my behaviors towards those things haven't changed. Like I can easily ignore a to-do list. But if I don't work at making intentional choices for to do those things, then it just doesn't work. It's just another list that I don't get through for that day.
yeah, and I wouldn't be fair if it sounds easy, like don't fall into your day, but it all ties back to our core belief systems. And so, the average person that's coming to me doesn't believe that they don't have a belief system that they have a degree of control over their experience, right? So it goes back to this belief system. And I always ask this question in coaching. I say, do you believe that life is happening for you, or do you believe that life is happening to you? And that is so telling, because if they believe life is happening to them, um, then they don't have control. They don't have the ability to create, because they're surviving, right? And when we're in survival mode, we talked about this on Monday. When you're in survival, you can't create. So it's getting them out of the survival into the empowered state, and understanding if their core belief system is that they believe that they can control, or that life is happening for their highest good. The experiences that they're having are there to help them grow, expand, or whatever.
Yeah, and I think also with that is this idea that you and I have talked about quite a bit is your physical nature and the physical state, how it relates to all this as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
And I think, that doesn't necessarily mean everyone's an athlete or everyone has to be an athlete or anything like that. But the way you physically feel and how you take care of your physical self has a direct correlation on your approach to a day and your ability to be intentional. And I think that's one of the areas that when we work with teachers, that's one place we can focus on. Like, and it doesn't like I said, you don't have to be an athlete. Like
No.
you can walk, you can do low impact pieces and things like that. But there's a direct connection to how your brain functions and how your body feels
Yeah.
in approaching this type work.
And how you show up, like everything, energy. I believe everything is energy. What we how we show up is very important, in terms of how people will experience you and how you will experience scenarios. So, if I say that we know guarantee stress is inevitable every day, then what are our strategies to mitigate that stress? And there are two things that I'm always very keen about highlighting, and that is meditation and movement. Like, you don't have to, like you said, be an athlete, but if you move your body, and if you find moments of quiet to get present to, a few minutes of silence, those are two very important tools that can help you be able to mitigate stress, therefore have better energy, therefore show up better. So it's like it all ties together. If you want to feel empowered, that's exactly, you know, what we have to do.
Yeah, and I think about, from an educator perspective, I think about the how often do we have or do we promote movement among our staff members and our teaching staff members? How often at faculty meetings is it everybody sitting around a room? There's lots of protocols, discussion protocols, and group meeting protocols that involve movement that we could
Right.
incorporate. That involve, hey, instead of having this conversation with your colleague right here at this table, like the traditional turn and talk, we call it, let's take this and let's do a loop of the hallway. Like go right around, like you and your colleague just take a lap and
Yeah.
walk and things. And again, simple, maybe a little corny and things like that. But movement is key, and movement changes the chemicals that our body produces and
Yeah.
how we approach a conversation and how we approach thinking about things. I know for me,
You're a
I can
runner,
say,
right?
yeah, my
You're a runner.
best self is
Yeah.
the one that, like yesterday, my daughter and I went running and she fell actually, so it wasn't great, but she was able to continue running. But I said to her along the way, like, just, we're in the middle of the woods. I said, there's no sound, like not even a plane was flying overhead, and there was wind in the trees. I'm like, there's something to that. Like, there's something that we're going to be able to take from this. Um, that will calm ourselves or enable us to go forward in our day or reflect back on it at some point in a stressful situation. Like I
Mhm.
have that image, I have that sound. Um, and again, it sounds all wonky in some cases, but for me, it works. And for me, I'm able to deal with stresses and things like that when I know I can have the moments like that.
It's nature. I ask people all the time, when people come and they're feeling at their lowest, I'm asking basic questions like, when was the last time you got out in nature? When was the last time you like walked in a park and you were
Mhm.
around trees and you heard the birds and you were just completely disconnected from technology, right? We know technology is a stressor. We know it. So it's important. And no wonder why you feel better, because you're moving your body and you're in nature. You're not like on a treadmill in your basement. Like, very big
Right.
difference. But like, I get that all the time when I'm talking to people, they're disempowered. The first thing I will ask, and chances are so common, they haven't moved their body, they haven't stepped away and done something that they love, right? I can't tell you how
Mhm.
many people say they don't have a hobby, or I don't even know what I would do if I had a hobby. I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, I was telling you before we went live that there's two things I'm doing. I'm learning how to play the ukulele and I'm learning how to golf. Just because I know that if I don't, I will work. So I have to have these creative outlets to grow and do different things just to disconnect. And I think people
Yeah.
need to realize that the disconnection is so nourishing.
Yeah, and I think that's the one of the big stumbling blocks. I'm already trying to think about what people might be, thinking in their heads, like, oh, it's great that she has time to play golf and then things like that. But there's that time factor. The
Oh, yeah.
first steps with this process and working with you and having this type of coaching are about, let's do an inventory. Let's find small bits of time that can grow incrementally over the time that you work together, because you didn't, you didn't always have time to go play golf or didn't always have time to do that, but you've worked at creating the space for that. And I think
Yes.
that's what everyone has to remember, that it might not feel like you have that time in your life right now. There may be, family pressures that keep you in a groove that you can't get out of, but working slowly over time, that groove can change and you can create time to work on these things, which are really important for you to be able to show up and be your best self for, in this case, the kids that you work with every day.
It's intentionality. Like, no, I don't have time. I don't have time to do these things, but I create it, right? Like, so my day starts very early and I do that on purpose so that I can create time to do that. It's just intentionality. And it's funny because sometimes when I have these conversations with my coaching clients, like, I'll say to them, so what time do you get home from work? And they'll be like, 4 o'clock, maybe 4:30. I'm like, what time do you go to bed? 10:30. How many hours between 4:30 and 10:30? Okay, great. So how long does it take to eat? Okay, great. So how long does it take to clean up? How long does it take to hang out with your child and help them with their homework? Okay, great. So how many hours are left? So it literally is about perspective, basically.
Hmm.
Like, if you
Right.
have that span of time, it's just about, how do I be more intentional with those hours that I do have, instead of looking at it from a space of scarcity, lack, and when I get, and if I could just get a day off and da da da. Like, no, make the time.
Right. Hmm.
It's funny.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Kaylee in the chat had said,
Yes.
approaching, coaching and thinking about getting out of survival mode is really important. And like these small things help us do that. Our brain automatically wants to make decisions that it's comfortable with in response to similar stress. And so taking a step back and recognizing what those triggers are and looking at, okay, when I'm confronted with this situation every single day, this is how I behave, but that's not how I want to behave. How do I do that? And so finding the time to have that type of thinking is really important.
Thank you for being here, Kaylee. We appreciate you. You were here on Monday too, so it's always great to have you here. Awesome. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about on Friday, Patrick.
Yeah.
What are we talking about? Oh, we're going to do some questions, right?
Yes, we're going to take a compilation of questions we've received throughout the two sessions, and some we've received, independent of that. I know people that were on the session that messaged us privately also sent us some questions that we'll address there. We'll talk a little bit more, I believe, about working or approaching or being in situations where there are challenging individuals that you have to deal with, and how we might approach that, and how this type of work helps you approach that.
Yeah, that's from our summer series, Unshakable Resilience, which is all about being with the most difficult people, because it's inevitable that we will deal with people that are very challenging, can be extremely draining, and we don't have a choice. We have to. So how do we deal with that? So the whole goal of that module is to have people literally come out of that course unshakable and able to be with any kind of disposition, any kind of personality, and be, completely able to do that and be with that without it rocking them and rocking their peace. So yeah.
Yes, and very succinctly, wherever you go, there you are, and that's kind of where we're aiming with that.
Awesome. Patrick, always great to have a chat with you. So great to
You
have
too.
have you here and have us talk about this. I'm excited. And we will see everybody back here again on Friday at 12 o'clock Eastern time. So join us. We look forward to having you, and share the link for Friday. We're going to be sharing that link out, but invite the people in your life that you know, the educators that you care about, have them be a part of this conversation, and maybe there's some things that they can gather from our chat.
Excellent. Goodbye,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thanks, Patrick. Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
Michelle.
Thanks, Kaylee. See you later.